Okay, well,
you're alive. Right, good evening, everybody. Well, it's Wednesday, the 4th of December, 2024. This is Environment Select Committee of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Welcome to everybody in the room. Welcome to everybody who's joined us on broadcast. Before we start the business of the meeting, we should remember that in 2017, on the 14th of June, 72 of our neighbours lost their lives in the Grand Water Tower fire, and I would ask everybody to pause for 72 seconds in a moment when the mobile phones are off to remember those who lost their lives in the tragedy. Thank you very much indeed. We have apologies from absence from Councillor Mackover, who's at the Western Riverside board this evening. The only other absence is Councillor Benson. Do we have any apologies, or is he running late? Okay. Are there any declarations of interest from members of the committee? It's Paul's minutes of the last meeting. Am I able to sign those off? Seeing not all round to the expression of agreement, so I'm signing the minutes. Now done. I'll pass that over. And I'm just going to ask a couple of questions about the action tracker, which follows the minutes before we get into the first paper. First item on the action tracker. Local flood risk management strategy draft strategy briefing. This is the principal flood and water management officer to provide a detailed update on the insurance arrangements for properties at high flood risks. We provided within a year, which coincidentally is today. Where is it? Not received it. Who's responsible for it?
I would have been. Like that, myself and Jim.
Right. And any idea what, because you've arrived within last year, haven't you, both? So you might not know that you had that action.
No, I see an email between James Latham and Jez, and he provided a reason. Do you recall what it was? Sorry. Okay, it's because the London Surface Water Strategy has not been completed yet. An interim report was released by the GLA on the 24th. And what James is saying is that in order for us to provide a full update, we need to have the completed London Surface Water Strategy completed.
Do you have a timeline for when that might be completed?
The final strategy development will be released early in the new year. In the meantime, we're working with officers to kind of develop our end in background. So early in the new year.
Okay. I suspect, well, we'll record that. I suspect we might put a flooding item on the next financial year or the next municipal year's agenda, just to look at that again. We'll certainly record that and keep tabs on it. The next one I wanted to ask about, the third one down, again, from exactly a year ago, net zero, sponsored recommendations to select committee, director of cleaner, greener, helpful service provider, an update on the plans to transition to an electric waste collection fleet when ready. I think I know that, but I don't know whether we've actually had any kind of updated.
Yeah, I think we said we were going to incorporate it in here, so I can incorporate it into the net zero report.
Yeah, is it in there? I mean, I kind of can sort of know that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's all got a bit delayed because of the current depot situation.
Yes.
Not sure. So I can give a verbal update if it's not in here.
Yeah, I can't say that I sort of connected anything explicitly in the paper with that, but that might be me rather than your writing. So let's update that later.
Thank you.
And then the markets draft or markets allocation. Something will be consulted on in November. I'm just wondering, was it, because do I remember saying that?
We consulted with the PGM, so the market group, just for their support. It's going to go live in January now. There's a delay on that.
Right.
So
So you'll be
send you a copy of it.
sharing that with the team, or you can send it early if you want to, or in January, or whatever it is.
I send it tomorrow.
Thank you, Terry. That'd be great. And then biodiversity net gain should be due live on the website by the end of October 2024. Nobody drew our attention to it, so is it on the website?
Update the sites. Look.
Does that go live on the website?
Will it go on the website?
Google.
It's never come to me, but I assume it would go to Councillor Will as well, but I've not seen any.
Oh, if I can update you on later on that, would be great.
Yes, a later update on that one. And we were obviously meeting in January, so that would be helpful to know that before that. The final one I wanted to ask about was the regulation of construction sites. Again, that's quite an old update. I don't know if we've had anything there, but we are going to have reports on transport in March 25 at our meeting. So maybe
Andrew Burton, Director of Highways. So Andrew will sit down.
Sorry, Chairman, it's my fault that we voted at 23rd of March, but I didn't have it cleared and I never got it sent on. So I'm having it updated. It'll be with you by the end of the week.
Okay, well, that's also acceptable. So we could consider it in March if it's appropriate. But thank you, Andrew. Yes, doesn't you stood up there. I think everything else is within the time, so we can go on to the next agenda item, the main one, one of the main two, which is the budget and environmental services. So Jeremy is going to introduce it and then hear from your officers.
Yes, let's do that. So, Chair, there's very few bright lights in local government finance at the moment, but I like to think that environment and neighbourhood are keeping that sort of light on. With this year's budget papers, it's not been without its challenges, but the team have really, I would say, been overperforming this year in the way that they've been managing their finances. It's certainly the biggest factor in that has been and likely always will be parking services. We've seen a lot of improvements since the strike ended last year. Our CEO officers down on the street level have been really making sure that infractions have been dealt with. But on top of that, there's been a raft of improvements and savings that have been reported and also implemented. The most notable ones would be the graffiti cleansing service, which we've been able now to bake into the budget for the longer term. Likewise, we've also launched 2 clear all lorries, which patrol the borough 24 hours a day, removing bags as and when they find them. They go on top of individual ward funded electric buggies, which do the similar role, but do them specifically to those wards. These are sort of very discreet and bespoke services that the council has been able to fund predominantly because we've been able to stay within our budgets, but also that we've been fortunate being an inner London authority that parking revenues have returned not just to normal, but have actually seemingly gone ahead of where they are. Indeed, just today at the Transport and Environment Committee, a vote was taken to agree an increase in the charge for parking infraction tickets, so PCNs, to rise up to, from £65 if paid early up to £80. That will obviously have to be priced into the budget for the year ahead. I understand we weren't yet sure what that was likely to be, but that's likely to be a net positive to the council. There are still pressures within the team. We've had to look at the way that we manage, especially in the planning services, the amount of officers that we have, given the amount of planning applications that we've been receiving. There has been a bit of a lull on applications, but aside to that, we've also launched a fast track planning team as a means of bringing in additional revenue, legitimate revenue, for doing much the same work, but also with a clear focus on delivering good value for money to our residents, but effectively being able to monetize the service that historically has only been able to charge statutory rates. Being a net contributor to council finances has meant historically, I think we haven't been quite as scrutinised as we might ought to have been. We've always been able to accrue and grow our parking reserve quite significantly. Those days are long behind us. The council has now attributed a lot of that money to legitimate expenditure across the council, which means as a department, we are pulling our weight that much more. This year, again, we'll be contributing around 2.5–3 million. Those are on areas such as our recycling collections, but also on other areas where perhaps we may be able to support the HRA with public realm improvements. We've also been funding numerous schemes around the borough, such as just now on Hogarth Road, which is under at the moment. Those are all costly endeavours, but are all being carried out for the benefit of our borough and our residents. So this really sets the path for the year ahead. But I just want to really thank all the team, because it's got a wide remit. They do an awful lot of work, from food hygiene inspection to pavement maintenance, things that perhaps you don't necessarily assume council officers are busy doing, but they're all hard at work getting on with the scenes.
Good, Jim. I'll just Bo your chance now if you want to.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. I think Councillor Cetus is here today, and he's spoken before about the council's more natural backdrop, so we won't kind of repeat those conversations. Environment Neighbourhoods has got a duty to contribute towards ensuring that we have a balanced and sustainable service. We've asked for £1.152 million worth of growth. That's as per Appendix 3 within the proposals. We can talk through them as and when they come up. In terms of savings proposals, we had some existing savings from last year, but the new savings were a combination of reduction in headcount and also revised non-staffing savings to income of £4.9 million. So these are very much in consultation. We believe these are deliverable, and we've prioritised having as little impact on residents as possible and maintaining our frontline service delivery. That being said, in some areas you'll see that we are reducing service very slightly, but there are areas where we've used data to ensure that it won't have as much of an impact on residents as would be sought. So this is the summation of that. £4.9 million worth of saving. We're happy to take any complaints or queries. And it's worth also noting that this year we are delivering to budget and kind of actually under that amount. So we have, where those underspends or overachievements in incomes are sustainable, for example in parking, we've made them permanent. So they're one part of the budget as well.
Very good. Thank you very much. Terry, all those who want to add anything at this stage, or should we go to questions?
I'll say Andrew's here as well. So
we were Andrew's sitting down because there's
always very welcome to come to the table, Andrew, if that's fine, because I suspect there might well be some questions knowing what some of the committee colleagues are thinking about. So I'll start with Aaron there.
So, question more on the parking space. I know there's an So with PCM, when you understand it, because of the fault you pay PCM, that's fine. But in terms of your expectations against the net gains of the PCM, would that outweigh the public expectations
On the cost.
on the cost? Yeah.
But I don't think we've actually priced it in because I only informed them when I got given the papers.
So,
2 days ago.
Parking charges in London, Andrew's expert, have been static for a long time, so we can't, in terms of the penalty charge only, was what Jen was talking about earlier, that's set centrally. So, Transport and Environment Committee, which is the London Council's lead members from each of the areas, they essentially voted on endorsing a £30 per PCN increase. What we've noticed is our parking income is going up and our parking tickets, in terms of the volumes going up. We actually think in London, a lot of places now, it's cheaper to park and get a ticket than it is to pay display parking. So we hadn't priced in any increase in the parking charge. But if you're really careful with that, because what we will see is a reduction in the amount in people who are willing to take the risk on parking charges, and some of that may flip back to paid for parking sessions. So it's kind of a hard balance to get to. The current increase in parking income in the paper, around £3.5 million, that's consistent with the amount of money we're seeing this year. So that's not really a result of anything additional we'll do to the motorist or resident. That's making permanent our current income levels in parking that have bounced back after the COVID really this year. We need to be really careful this year that we still maintain that amount. So Lucy and the team in parking are tracking it. At the moment, we're still on track, but that is kind of baked in and what we're currently delivering.
Actually, a similar question on parking. I was just wondering, because it is a large stream of income for the department, how is that been evolving over the last few years, and how is that? What's the projections for the next few years on that one? I think you already indicated that it's going up.
The amount in here is the projection, so it is at its current kind of peak. We'd need to do some data because only today we found out the new charges.
Yeah, exactly.
So my not concerned, because I agree with Jen, there will be a net benefit to the council, but not all of that £30 can be applied to all issued PCNs, because there will be a percentage of those people who then go back to paying display parking because it's no longer that tipping point where it's cheaper to chance it and get a PCN.
On the individual sort of the philosophy behind it, we recently reprofiled our base rate from sort of petrol, where then we would apply a diesel surcharge, or then the electric discount. We now changed it so that our base rate is the electric car, knowing that over the longer term, eventually they all will become electric, even if government changes the policy. Eventually, I suspect we'll get the vast majority of vehicles there. So that has been something. And we also looked again at the differentials between our pricing zones. So every year we apply inflation to our pricing rate. But what that has done is it's sort of compound interest effect in very expensive areas. So it's meant the differential between band 1 and band 4 was growing ever larger every year, to the point where it was something like £1 in parts of North Kensington, all the way up to about £6 down in Brompton. And that was the gap was growing to a point where it was then becoming really unfair for sort of tradesmen or visitors to visit some parts of the boroughs versus the others. So we slightly reprofiled that. And I believe this year's proposals, we're increasing greater at the bottom end than we are at the top end, simply to bring that differential down a little bit. But maybe Andrew knows. Said something wrong there.
No, that's about right. The only thing I'll add to the extra PCN charge is that Transport for London, they had the same increase a couple of years ago, so we will use their profiling to estimate how many people will change behaviour and pay to park. We won't know yet when those charges will increase. Let's go to the Mayor of London and the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State for Transport, of course, was the Deputy Mayor for Transport for London until recently, so she's well versed on challenges for London places.
And if you allow me to ask a few questions on two other lines in the appendixes. The very last one, it's only a small amount, but here it's proposed to reduce their quality service and provide only basic statutory functions. There's no explanation next to that. Why would that be if it's only such a small amount?
Yeah, air quality, we have an air quality action plan, which is the statutory requirement is to produce that and to monitor performance against it. We do a lot more than that. As a council, unfortunately, we've got a large air quality and pollution regulatory team. And that's because we give lots of advice. We give we go to schools a lot. We go to interest groups. We spend a lot of time in the community guiding people. We're looking to change our air quality dashboard, should we say, so people will be able to much more self-serve that. It's been launched on a couple of boroughs in East London and in Westminster, and we're deciding at the moment which one works best, and that will lower down. It will reduce the time we spend interacting with it. And it's that start level. Yeah.
So it's nothing like reducing data collection or anything.
No. So one of the so diffusion tubes we have nearly 200. Again, the size of the borough, that's quite high, but we're not proposing to reduce that.
Okay. And then one other one, a rather big amount, just 2.8, widening the scope of what income from parking and enforcement is used to pay for. Again, no explanation. You explain a bit more.
Yeah, I can. So parking income is tightly regulated and what it can be used for. So in the council currently we use it for keeping our streets. We're obviously paying for the parking service itself. For highways and transportation, we also use it for keeping our streets clean. It also funds our parks and open spaces and those services. The council wasn't previously applying it to recycling, which is an applicable area of spend for that money. So the council's delivering additional parking income. To make an impact on the general fund, we need to find a way of allocating that against spend from the parking fund to the general fund. So we've now identified with legal advice that we can use it to pay for our recycling services, and our recycling services, correct me if I'm wrong, cost 2 points that amount. So we're at the 2.8 million. But we're now going to fund recycling out of the parking surplus. Broadly.
Pretty much, yeah. So I mean, ultimately, what Bo said is correct. So the amount the council generates from parking income is, uncapped demand rate, but the amount that we can retain in the year-end accounts is a direct mirror of what eligible expenditure we've incurred. And so if we were unable to find additional eligible spend to notionally kind of badge that income against as its source of funding, that's why the parking reserve exists. So if you get to the point of year where income from parking has exceeded the cost of administrating the parking service and other eligible areas of spend, we can place the balance in the parking reserve. And then that sits there for spend on other revenue or capital projects that are eligible. So by including recycling within the kind of mix of things that can badge against parking income, it allows us to budget for and retain the income in the annual account rather than receive the income but move it to the reserve.
Okay. I'm sure other councillors have others.
Thank you, Tim. And Dory.
Well,
I've got a question at the very beginning. There was a bit here where you've given responses on page 17, and it talks about fair funding to Carnival, and I was wondering if somebody can clarify a little bit for me, because if we recently heard police doesn't feel very safe at Carnival. So what are we doing to kind of like alleviate that feeling of unsafety? And at the same time, is the idea of increasing or potentially increasing traders will make the Carnival safer or less safe?
Question. So in terms of Carnival, there's a big discussion going on at the moment at a strategic level around the amount of resources the Carnival needs in order to be safe. I think it's a huge event, very complex event, and previous years we've kind of pulled together a budget, but it's never been sufficient. So there's kind of a strategic review going on now of Carnival in terms of power dynamics and safety and what resources are needed. It's looking at the police resourcing, it's looking at stewarding, it's looking at the event organisers. and also the contributions the council makes. So at the moment, we're basically saying as a council, we're not contributing any more until the review's done. So there is a set amount we contribute every year that goes towards the event organiser, so Notting Hill Carnival Limited, to run a safe event. We do get income in from street trading, but that doesn't offset the council expenditure. So it costs the council sort of about 800 to 900,000 a year. We are looking at increasing street trading to bring in some extra income, and we looked at that last year. We did increase some street trading, but then we were asked to take out some areas as well, which were viewed as kind of pinch points as well. So it's a bit of a moving picture the whole time. So this year we really want to get to the kind of the crux of the discussion, which is what will it take? How much resourcing will it take to deliver a safe event, and where can that funding come from? So there is a discussion taking place with central government as well, because we're basically saying it's a national or international event, and it benefits the whole of the country and the whole of London. So therefore, it shouldn't be just down to kind of RBKC and Westminster to contribute. There should be a wider contribution. The GLA and the police do contribute a lot as well. So it's looking at kind of broadening the funding base for Carnival and making sure it is properly resourced.
But has the police issue been addressed as an issue in itself?
Yeah.
Because when the police comes out and tells you we don't feel safe,
Yeah.
then you really are in serious trouble, because how are the rest of us going to feel safe?
Yeah. So the role of the police at Carnival is being reviewed. So they're always going to be the key partner for Carnival, but it's a community event. It's organised by Notting Hill Carnival Limited. So what we're trying to look at is that the role of the police, and they want to go back to more kind of core policing activity, and then the event organiser with stewarding and properly trained stewards takes on a bit more of that crowd management role. But that's going to take time. It's going to take resource to get to that stage where everyone's confident for the police to kind of step back. So what we're trying to look at now is that kind of bridging the funding gap that will create. So it's basically kind of top loading the budget so we can train up the stewards, we can train up the event organisers, get to a certain agreed kind of standard, and then the police will feel more comfortable stepping back if that's what they want to do.
So one final question.
Is it on the budget or?
Sorry?
Is it on the budget?
But isn't that part of the budget?
It can be,
Yeah,
yes.
the
If you're still on Notting Hill, yes, because I've got something on Notting Hill Carnival. So if you're on that subject, yeah, carry on.
Yeah, okay. So if this, from what you just said, I'm getting the impression that stewards are supposed to do more by way of managing or by way of securing.
There are currently areas of the policing plan that the police believe isn't core policing, and that's to be determined. So at the moment, Terry and colleagues part of the strategic review are trying to understand whether the roles that are being undertaken by police in some areas could be undertaken by stewards. If that's the case, and it's likely that there are some areas that will be the case, there'll be a funding pressure because someone's got to pay for those stewards. So as part of the work that Terry, the police and other partners are doing, they're trying to understand what is the police's core role, where they need to be deployed, which areas can be safely understood and lived by stewards, but then what does that do to the cost and how we fund it? And as Terry said, we've seen the data. People come from Carnival from all over London, all over the UK, all over Europe. So we are working with the GLA, our partners, to say it is an international event, and can you help support us to make it as safe as it can be, and share some of the burden of funding that? But you're absolutely right. There are areas where stewards could take more of a role and the police could step back, but there is a cost to that, and there is a training issue, and it will take some time to make sure we plan that in a way that's not all at once, because it needs to be done in a phased way that's sustainable and safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the first recommendation that this committee made under my predecessor's chairmanship last year to lobby the government and partners for fairer funding for the Notting Hill Carnival, And that's effectively what you described, Terry, and obviously it's a work in progress. What's your timeline for getting an answer out of that? Do you think it'd be better in time for Carnival 25?
Fingers crossed, but yeah, it's so there's a funders group that's set up, and Maxine sits on that with Stuart Love. So it's the chief exec, and it's the kind of very senior police and the GLA as well. So they are talking around the funding requirements, and then they kind of have a direct line with central government. So those discussions are taking place. Hopefully we will get some feedback around timelines, but we've kind of put a request in that we need something for 2025 Carnival. But I think there'll be a bigger discussion around after the strategic review is completed.
Yeah,
we know fully exactly kind of the resource demand.
Brilliant. And that's actually a situation that we're hosting an international event at our borough's expense. So in terms of when I'm thinking about when I should recommend that you update our committee, when would be a reasonable time for us to ask for an update on this work stream?
Must we say late spring or early spring, like March, April time?
Well, yeah, I'll give you a little bit longer than that. When's our first meeting likely to be in the next year? Will there be one in June? Probably. Perhaps we can have it on, maybe even think about putting it on the agenda for June. But
I was really bring a Carnival update at that stage anyway.
Yes.
So I'm more than happy to do that.
Well, I think that would be a recommendation then, that we get an update from you on that work stream, which is clearly still a work in progress.
Yeah, I can update you offline as well around the progress of the funders group.
Maybe to do that as well, but perhaps if we have something, an update for the June meeting next year, or late May, whenever it's scheduled. So I don't know off the top of my head. I think the other bullets on page 17 reflect the other recommendations from the committee, and I think the second bullet is kind of addressed.
Sorry, that it's interesting. You wanted me to ask a question about one of those bullet points, if that's the moment I could do.
Yes, if you will. I was going to go through them, but I think so. The second bullet is sort of almost part of the first recommendation, and it's sort of addressed there. The third bullet is incorporated in the next paper, and I think that's the one you've got questions about. Is it, Dorian?
To ask about the 2 additional areas of street trading, as Mr. Oliver is here, or whoever. I'm just curious which roads were in mind.
Well, then let's have the answer that question then, please.
Yeah, there's some of the roads around just off between Portobello and Ladbroke Grove were the main areas we were looking at. It's working with the wider stakeholders, because suddenly we can put a stall in, but it has implications on other things as well. So it's just socialising those plans. And then we've also got the House of Vibes, the Acklam Village area, where we did take on some of the trading responsibilities last year. So we are looking at formalising that as well.
Thanks. I think the fourth bullet's addressing this budget paper, and the fifth bullet was sent to the committee, the then committee members in March last year, and I have actually seen it as well, so that's been satisfied. So we're really getting the outstanding on last year's recommendations is the lobbying fairer funding for Notting Hill Carnival, and I think yes, that's still live, and we recommend to have an update by June next year, please. Yeah. In terms of other questions I had, in Appendix 2, and I think I'm on page 31 here, we've got 2 items from this year's savings, which was listed as not delivering, or forecast to not deliver. I understand that's now 1, not 2 of them. But can you say a bit more about that in your business, please?
Terry, remember the contract thing that relates to
Yeah, so it counts the 30,000, 20,000. It's the arts grants that we have. So we have around £30,000 we give out in arts grants to local artists or community groups, up to a maximum of £3,000. That was put forward as a saving, which was then accepted, and then we were asked to reinstate the grant.
So in some cases, savings are put forward, and in reality, when the face of doing it is quite challenging, I think in that circumstances, when the relevant lead members were faced with kind of implications of doing it, we were able to use money internally. So this year our budget is not overspent, but it's underspent. So in effect, we've mitigated that saving, it's undeliverable. So it was obviously evaluated, went through the process. It's one out of the list. And the implications were not palatable at the time, so it was impacting on things like Black History Month grants and those kind of areas. And it was felt that wasn't appropriate at the time.
We'll come back to some of those things later. And I think the second one has always gone away, hasn't it? That's all.
Yes,
So moving on to the savings. I mean, firstly, a sort of overall important on about pulled on the savings because I pass over the growth page, and I will just say I personally welcome the good news about mainstreaming or mainlining or whatever phrases we use in the council, the growth in the street cleaning and graffiti removal service. It is much appreciated, and you can see a tangible difference from it on the streets. I think so. Putting that into the mainstream budget is a really good thing, and well done to those who made it so. But then we get onto the savings, which obviously the less sometimes less palatable bit. But how confident are you overall that this savings will be delivered?
So yeah, very confident is the answer. A lot of them relate to income, and they're based on things that we're already delivering. So our current budget for parking, for example, that's currently tracking out at that amount. Same for sports bookings and other elements, waste contract efficiencies, we know has been undertaken. So we are confident. I think the more challenging ones are ones that always involve services where demand changes. So we talked through that before. Staffing savings are challenging in terms of actually delivering them because people are involved, obviously. But we have tried to be sensitive, and we have tried to pick out areas where we believe we can maintain the existing level of service, or where other areas of the council, such as communities, can support with culture and arts, for example. So broadly very confident, particularly around the income. But no doubt there will be feedback from consultation and also this committee that will have to consider and review before they go forward for recommendation.
And so you're modelling for income projection, you're pretty confident in it, though, is that done?
Yes, yeah, okay. And that is kind of the lion's share of the savings. We were asked to look at our staffing levels, and we have reduced them where we feel it's appropriate and able to maintain current service levels delivery for residents.
Okay, I mean, just going through one of the income lines, I mean, I think one I'm interested in, jobless rental e-bikes, an increase in fees. I mean, how do we get the money? Where's that?
Yes, I think that's an actual pros there.
Yes, so we have had memoranda of understanding with the operators, and they have told us they want to renew those memoranda. So there are 3 operators. So if we agree terms, then it's fine. But one of the conditions is they pay us to provide all the parking base for the e-bikes, for instance. So that there is if we sign those agreements, there will be money coming our way. It's at the moment that we haven't signed them yet. Probably hope to.
We're still moving in that direction, obviously subject to contract.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Next one, and I think this has just been alluded to, the review of the culture service 120. Utilise additional capacity across different services, mostly communities, to lead on culture and place, resulting in efficiencies being made. So what's that mean in practice?
So it's currently in consultation, both through Budget Station and also within the service. We've been asked to reduce headcount. Speaking to colleagues in culture, there's a lot of synergies. So grant giving, working with the community, we believe that we can reduce management within the culture service headcount and across by using the current capacity listed in communities. So that's under Moira and her area. But it wouldn't affect the delivery of museums, for example, those kind of areas, but it's just around management headcount. So it's reducing management headcount through other services and communities where they can kind of take back the on.
Okay, so it's a genuine reduction, not a switching out of this budget and appearing as a
No,
growth in
it's
some
the
of
headcount,
budgets.
so they're-
Because I think communities is scrutinised by a different committee, so I
Yes.
wouldn't be expecting to see a growth if I looked
No.
at housing paper,
No.
there wouldn't be a growth in
No,
communities.
at the moment, I mean, like I said, we've been given really clear direction on reducing headcount, and that relates to FTE posts.
And presumably culture is, well, I don't know, I mean, you tell me, is it a statutory service? Are there any statutory services within that? So it's entirely discretionary.
It is, but the council delivers some really kind of excellent facilities that are really well valued by the public. And in all of this, our key priority has been to maintain related house museums. So although the headcount, the management team may be affected, it wouldn't affect at present the delivery of these proposals, the delivery of those kind of institutions or the work that the team does.
Okay, and I think I was going to ask about the air quality service. It was a similar question really, because you actually referred to the statutory function there. That you really drilled down and focused on the statutory function. Doesn't feel right. It's always when you're under pressure, of course, it's always good that you focus on what we actually have to do. But I suppose the review of the ecology service and community garden, which comes up few runs above the air quality one, that's presumably also not a statutory service, or maybe it is.
Not statutory, but again, really well valued. So we're seeking, so ecology and community gardeners, we've sought public health funding. So public health will fund the difference, because they believe that the work undertaken by the teams benefits kind of residents and public health outcomes. And for those two areas, it's been confirmed community garden ecology.
Right, so you've got public health funding.
So they'll fund those elements of the service with the amount in the paper.
Very good.
Sorry, Chair, can I ask another point?
Well, what about when I finish my own question?
Oh, sorry, your point, that's all. Okay.
Yeah, because I'm on the flow at the moment. So overall, then to what extent do you have an understanding of what's statutory and what's not statutory in your service? And what?
Yeah, pretty well. So it's really challenging. So I wish there was a binary answer of statutory, non-statutory. So dare I say it, street cleansing, waste, all of these services, statutory services, but the frequency isn't. So whilst they're statutory, we can always talk about levels of service. So we really value them. Our residents want clean streets, waste collection service. And in terms of non-statutory, yes, elements like culture, museums are non-statutory, but again, they're really well valued by our residents. We're really clear on kind of the binary side of non-statutory. It's about level of service that we deliver. That's always the challenging point. Do we want a gold, silver, bronze service? And we know in our case we want to deliver the best service for our residents. So how do we do that while still kind of meeting our budget requirements is the challenge. And we hope with income and for reduction in management headcount that at present we can maintain our frontline service delivery. In future years it may get more challenging and we may have different conversations, but at present we think we're just about there.
Yeah, I'm clearly not for this year because I've seen the overall budget, but I guess there's that point of what are the leadership's priorities for the council. I'll get James to comment on that in a moment.
So yes, we are clear on what isn't statutory. It's just the shades of grey within that statutory.
And if we have to choose between a museum and an ecology service, we could actually scrap both of them and still meet our statutory requirements, but we probably wouldn't want to because but I think we just need to know, we need to understand that.
Absolutely. And we'd want to look at other options for funding those services. So, for example, we'll talk about public health funding. So is that another avenue for relevant services? Is look at different delivery models that we're charging an appropriate way of delivering that. But you're absolutely right. There may be a point in time we have to consider just what we look at that,
or in terms of just introducing statutory example, reducing the street with the waste collection to once every 3 weeks, like in some counties and boroughs.
I dare you to comment.
This is a political priority.
Yes,
the council to decide that we want twice a week.
Members are really clear with us that we need to within this budget round maintain our current excellent levels of service. Notwithstanding the challenges in the borough lot of EKC, where wheelings aren't appropriate and people have to store waste in quite difficult and small and within properties and things. So actually our service and the makeup of our borough, the physical geography means that we're kind of delivering the service we need for the present. There are always options, but at present it's been made really clear for us that that needs to be maintained.
Okay, so
And that's protected there.
So that's the official answer, though. Thank you very much. And the political leadership answer then, Jen, how confident are you that your budget is laser focused on your political priorities, the council and leadership's political priorities in your area, and we're not wasting on areas that are not a priority?
I suppose it's rare for politicians to give an honest answer, but I suppose I don't entirely think it is. I think what we have in this budget is everything we've always done and some things that we're going to do better. But we're on for a better phrase, effectively salami slicing areas of staffing and savings, rather than actually transforming the way we do a service or deciding whether or not we actually do a service. There's nothing in here that we are no longer doing. We're simply in some places reducing what we do. So, and I appreciate some statutory that you can't go below the minimum. But there are proper, genuine conversations we need to have about whether or not we believe in having a gold, silver, or bronze service. The price of gold has clearly gone up recently, but I don't think this is that budget just yet. I don't really feel that anything in here about proper digitization, getting people off of using council services, helping them sort of self-serve effectively. I think what we do is very good. Our waste claiming is good, but we're slightly resting on our own laurels of the quality of the waste claiming that we've always had. Going around London now, even in boroughs that don't have the budget for the size that we do, streets are cleaner. So it's not good enough for us to simply say, well, we've always had this, we're going to protect and maintain it. We have to consistently look at what is best in class, because if we are trying to be the best council, we may not be able to be the best in absolutely everything, but we should pick the things we want to be, look at who's doing it the best, be them in the UK or abroad, and actually try and emulate or indeed supplant them. So I'm confident in the budget that's being put forward. I think actually we're probably likely to deliver above what we've put here, notably on parking, on moving traffic contraventions. Again, just this morning, total PCNs from 2010 have gone from 4 million to 4.5 million across London, but on moving traffic contraventions over the same time period, it's gone from 3.3 million to 8.5 million. So councils are clearly relying on those PCNs. They don't like to talk about them as being income, but fundamentally they're here as an income saving. So I think this is a really good start, but for the year ahead, I really want us to focus on actually deciding what we do and then how we do it in the most efficient way possible. Hopefully that's honest enough.
It's very honest. I mean, that's what these committees are for honest discussion and looking at the issues. And clearly you've done a good job in getting to a balanced budget this year. But the problems and the challenges are not going to go away. So how can we best support you by asking a question to focus your minds over the coming 12 months? Then what would you what would you like us to ask for?
What can we live without? I suppose there's a lot that we do that I don't think necessarily we have to do, or to flip it the other way, it's if we want to maintain things at what level, because we can, as Bo says, go change our waste collection service quite radically and make enormous savings. But chipping away at 10,000 here, 12,000 over there, as opposed to sort of wholesale multi-million-pound contract reductions on very large contracts that we have, are very different sort of end points for us as a council. So we can, of course, continue these sort of incremental improvements here or there. But I think if we're going to genuinely try and meet the budget gap that we can see in the years ahead, we have to be looking at some slightly chunkier, be that even museums or ecology centres, whatever they may be, whether they should remain as council service, council asset. we formulate that as a question.
Yeah, so I think, the paper I would like to see, I think, and I'm thinking on my feet here, is something that sets out what are the services that this director has to provide by statute, and then where are we enhancing those services because we've chosen to, and we might well choose to keep them there, like the twice 50 bin collection, because I wouldn't fancy our chances of coming back here if we didn't keep that. And what extra are we doing that we think is it might be something we've inherited, like the museums, and we keep them going because they're great to listed buildings and they do need to be maintained, and by accident council's got them and somebody's got to look after them. Or it might be something that's in there that really is a slightly lower priority for residents, and actually we have to take a not quite so hard decision to stop doing something. And I think we probably ought to understand those points as part of the process of preparing a future budget. We've clearly done a good job for this year. So I wonder what timeline we ought to ask for reports along those lines.
Well, we'll be starting doing our budget kind of planning for the year after in January, actually, so in the spring.
So would this be a sort of prep for next year's budget? Was it a report along, we'll have progress along the way towards that kind of thinking?
We can certainly, I think, provide kind of a list of all our services, which ones are statutory, non-statutory, and we can probably make some comparisons. So the challenge is always this kind of shades of grey in terms of what level of service we have. What we can maybe do is provide some comparisons of other boroughs, similar kind of makeups in different areas, and what levels they provide, and that gives you a kind of a flavour of what other people are doing and the impact and the options for the borough.
So just to add that, I think there's also an element of how we deliver a service, because that we are well behind on self-service, digital, and our paperwork offering. We're very good at producing paperwork, but not so.
Yeah, so council will absolutely have a lot more options in terms of how we manage the line of contact as the new CRM goes online. So we hope to have some kind of more options around that as well in future years.
But would the committee be with me on that as an ask? The officers as a recommendation?
Yeah, it's a good idea, right? Yeah, also what Mr. Stanton Francis suggested, an actual comparison with other boroughs, I think would be really useful.
Yeah.
Especially just in conversation with residents.
Welcome that opportunity.
Great, thank you very much. Right, well, I think we'll draw the conclusion, draw that paper to the conclusion. Thank you very much.
Sharon?
Well,
Sorry, can I come on that?
yeah, well, actually, yes, we got some councillors from I do apologise, the other accounts. Yes, I don't do it, but I think we need to let Dory had a couple of bites of the cherry, and so I'm going to go for the councillors.
Thank you. I was just, there are 5 savings here which affect the front line. And one of them almost looks like a save to spend, which is the reduction in highways maintenance. Is there going to be some monitoring of the effects of these? So another one is, the beloved noise and nuisance service. Is there going to be some monitoring of what effect these reductions have, just to make sure in the long term that they're safe? And 2 of them I noticed, one of which the chairman raised, are sort of savings that aren't savings because they're going to, we're not actually going to see a cut in the service, so it's not described because there's going to be alternative funding. But one of these is funded by public, potentially funded, I understood, by Public Health, which already is drawing down 2.5 million to balance its own budget this year, which is a finite activity, as we know. So is that really realistic? And if it isn't, shouldn't there be a bit more detail about the impact of that?
So so in terms of our highways, so we have kind of asset management plans and strategies, so we've got a clear understanding of the deterioration of the highway. So we receive complaints around potholes and those kind of things, and so we'll have the data. So that saving, I understand, Andrew, currently reflects the actual service level. We've got a vacancy.
That's right. So we've been running that with a saving.
So we're currently running the service at that level. That's making a current vacancy permanent. Obviously, if we see increased highway spend or issues or claims, for example, we would obviously kind of revisit that. But at the moment, we've been running for quite some time at that service level, and we've been given a really clear instruction of members cut headcount. So we're trying to find savings that can cut headcount where we're currently doing it in that way. So that's the dilemma we're in. On noise and nuisance, we currently deliver a day service. So I don't know how many of us here have complained about noise and nuisance in the day. We have other staff members on who can potentially go out and cover that. So we don't see that as an actual impact on service delivery in terms of the impact on residents. The last question, sorry, was about public health. And public health, so we currently get a public health grant, and this is kind of changing the way we use when we already get an ENN with public health's consent. So they've got a new model through public health team and Josh, and they've scored all of the bids, and they believe the community gardens and ecology is the highest scoring bids in terms of the public health outcomes, and that money's been given to us for 4 years. So I think it's a 3 or 4 year, 3 year process of it, 1 year into the cycle. So that is guaranteed funded service delivery. And I agree, it's a different source of funding, but the question we would set is, can we reduce our general fund expenditure? And we've reduced the general fund expenditure by that amount. So although I get your point and agree with you.
Partly it's the way it's expressed. It's as if, you know, even at this stage, the funding isn't certain.
When these papers were written, it wasn't confirmed, but for community gardening and for ecology, that's now been confirmed. So I do apologise.
No, that's not.
Yeah,
that clarifies that for me. And the only other question I wanted to ask was about the parking 2.8 million. So more than half the savings is basically the increased income from parking reserves. And every year we try and turn more of the parking income into defrayable kind of, you know, ways of reducing our costs. Is this an infinite process, and why isn't it 5 million in that case?
So the honest answer is we thought we'd hit a ceiling. We thought we'd applied all of the spend. I started this year. My view was that recycling, food waste met the criteria. We took legal advice and legal concurred. But again, we're probably at a ceiling again. So any parking income over and above, unless we can find additional eligible to match it to, will go into the parking reserve. That's not a massive problem for the council because we have loads of highways related schemes that we need to fund, but at the same time, it doesn't support the general fund issue, which is meeting that general fund pressure. So you're absolutely right again.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Thanks, Mary. And my apologies for not going to the council as well, members of the committee.
It's all right. I'm quite capable of shouting.
You are, yeah.
Used to being ignored.
Got in there pretty. Anything from me. But I'm with apologies to the others, I'm going to stop that discussion there and move on to the next paper. But thank you very much for coming. It's important we need to move on time-wise. So we have a loo break going on, I think. There,
Chair, can we raise the pothole question in the next paper?
and this
Highways.
possible, probably nice to
We just raised. It was essentially Mary.
Yeah, so I'm moving on to this paper because we don't want to be here till 9:30 this night. And we have a new set of people coming in to introduce the next paper. I thought I'd lost one committee member. I've actually lost two committee members to the natural breaks.
Sorry, Chair, just for my own knowledge, did you mention the question that I was sort of hinting I might bring up? 'Cause I know sort
In a
of
slightly different form, but I'm going to bring you on because you missed most of the debate. So I haven't got.
that's quite.
I will bring you on for this.
That's great, thank you. That's just for my own knowledge.
Do we need 3?
Well, we do, but I'd really like the 2 that we're missing, actually now 3 that we're missing to the introduction to the paper. Unusual to have it could. morning then, and welcome to Johnny and the new team who's up on mostly new team. Who's up. Johnny, would you like to introduce your benches?
Sure. Well, thank you for asking for this update. I think it tries to do what it says on the tin. It brings together a lot of the work that's happening in the greener part of the council, and what we're doing is to try and bring down our emissions to net zero. I think it's a very worthy aspiration, and we're trying to make good on it. But there are financial constraints, and so we also have to steer a pragmatic course. What you can see is there is a lot of activity happening. Emissions are coming down by a kind of substantial amount, which I think we should welcome. I think our emissions are coming down among the fastest in the city, so that's something we should be proud of. Not just because that's something that's fantastic for the environment and for the environment that we will live in, but also because it reflects the good financial stewardship that we have the means to do so and to move quickly when there are challenges like this. But we should be mindful when we've just been talking about the budget that the context is becoming harder. So I think over the coming years there are going to be some very difficult choices about the scope, the scale, the pace of the ambition and the commitments that we want to make. I think there are some really big and ambitious programs which I really strongly support around the retrofit accelerator in particular, which has a really material impact on our emissions, and also the work that we're doing with the Northvale Future Neighbourhood, because it is an area that this council has a particular commitment to, and this is a good example of partnership working. But we are going to need to think quite carefully about the next steps on our net zero journey, if I can look that. And I think this is a good opportunity to take stock of that.
Okay, thanks very much. We see if any of the officers want to tarry on your team.
I suppose just to give a kind of summary of the report, it does set out carbon savings here, but also some of the really good work that has been done as Councillor Pelosi said, a really good school programme, and that's looking to be expanded. Housing is our biggest area of emissions, and that is tough. And there is the housing team oversee that directly, so we work with them. But that's a huge area of our emissions, and there's some really exciting stuff there that is really challenging as well. And I suppose it's just worth bringing to your attention as well some really successful external fundraising that's happened as well. So we brought in over £10 million towards delivering net zero over the last few years. So there's some additional big funding bids in the pipeline as well, which we're just securing now. So it's a very small team delivering quite big work. So yeah, just to give that context.
Very much. So we'll any additions? No. Okay, so we'll start with the committee. I said I'd start with Toby. So
actually, you mind if you don't start? I just want to avoid myself. So.
Okay. I'll go to the end and I'll work down the line. And
Okay, thank you, Chair. You're right, also this is right, it is a journey. And in journeys, usually people kind of mindful to take steps towards the end as opposed to jump and leapfrog into it. And you also very correct in mentioning that our housing stock is going to be the biggest challenge. But let's face it, our housing stock is not, I don't want to sound negative, but it's not the best quality. And when you have poor quality, it becomes very difficult to kind of insulate and retrofit. Have we considered some of these houses, some of the housing to actually rebuild? I know we have a moratorium on actually saying the word regeneration, but it might be more cost effective and it might be greener in the long run to build something for the next 100 years as opposed to patch and, just cement what we're having now. But having said that, I think this is a very good report. It kind of, for me, it kind of opened my eyes to how far this greening is, because sometimes there are things that needs to be green we don't think about, but that kind of like opened my mind. So thank you very much.
In terms of the housing question, it is a really complex one, and obviously you're playing with people's homes as well, so decisions you take it lightly. It's also the housing team have done a review of all the housing stock. So there is a housing stock or condition surveys that are done as well. So it would be done on a kind of an estate or a property by property basis, and then they have to make that call to see whether there is it's a worthy investment in kind of retrofitting and stuff. But there's some really big retrofitting programs going on, certainly in like Nottingdale, got the heat network as well going in, so that's delivering low carbon heating, and there's potential to expand that as well. So yeah, I think housing is going to be really challenging, but I think the fabric first approach is really key. So some of the units that have been retrofitted in Nottingdale, they're cooler in the summer and they're warmer in the winter, and then there's a lot of kind of co-benefits associated with it as well. So there's better ventilation, it stops like the damp and mold situation as well. People are paying less on their bills as well. So there's a lot of extra kind of co-benefits from this. So I think one of the takeaways which I'd ask you to just consider is that even though we're classing this kind of net zero, this is really improving people's lives as well. There's a big kind of co-benefit associated with this. It's actually improving how people live. It's making their lives better in terms of the houses are better. There's not the damp and mold and stuff like that, and they feel better. Their health is better and stuff as well. So there's a huge like co-benefit there.
And just to add, similarly as we've attracted governmental funding for the schools retrofit, public sector decarbonization fund, housing projects have been able to attract a social housing decarbonization fund in terms of millions. So again, not relying completely on the council funding, and I think governmental funding going forward will be more and more available, and making sure that the council can actually successfully secure.
Just possibly worth noting as well that that external funding is really meant for retrofitting works rather than rebuild works, so you can only use it for very specific works.
So rather than going directly down the line, I think Tim, your questions are probably a natural follow-up. So
yes,
you come next, and then we'll
so,
go back.
The additional question that I had were indeed around the housing as well, and I really commend all the work that is being done in the area. What the report doesn't really tell me is the total impact of all that work, and visualizing of what needs to be done. So kind of let's say we have 1,000 houses. Of those 1,000 houses, 200 are currently within those projects being developed. What is outstanding? What's the impact of these projects, and how much is still left to do? That doesn't really tell me that. Are you able to give me some more information on that?
We can. So there was a project called Parity Projects as well, and it's kind of assessed all the housing stock across the borough, and it kind of gave it the EPC rating as well, and it kind of set out the kind of the work that was needed to get it up to at least EPC C or above. So we've got that, and it's about 12,000 units, I think, isn't it, in total across the council actually owns. Yeah. So we've started. The housing team has started work on that, but the vast majority is still outstanding. So I'll send you some information on that.
Yeah, we can provide. Mindful that we haven't provided the whole, overview of the council housing stock. It's mainly focused on what has been done so far. I guess at the moment they are also looking on the program, a cyclical program as well. So we're trying to tap into those as well. We can potentially provide that offline in the next.
That would actually be quite helpful, just to see where we are, how far we are from reaching our net zero targets on time. If we're not reaching that, how much more of an effort do we actually need to do than is being asked of us, or do we need to get other sources in that front? But it would actually be good to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would say you're right to have a light on housing, because it is by a long distance the biggest challenge we have with net zero. If you look at the HRA, it's in a really difficult place right now. So the level of investment required is absolutely extraordinary relative to the kind of available funding. So there are some really good projects that I think are underway. For example, the work that we aim to do at Lancaster West, I think, will have a really positive impact in terms of bringing down emissions and improving people's life quality. But doing that at the scale required is going to be something that is really, really hard, I think, for us and for every other council. So we could probably pull out the HRA Works programme and just say, you know, these will have an environmental benefit and these won't. And it would be, you know, that there is a figure that we will have of the number of units that we own. So I think the question you're asking we can answer relatively quickly, but I suppose I'm seeking to manage expectations about what's possible given the cost inflation that has taken place over the past few years, and also the kind of the availability of skills and workforce and
That was actually my
lead
follow-up
times in
question.
terms of materials and construction. These are all things that are materially changing the outlook in terms of delivering large capital projects, and net zero is one of those areas.
Yeah, that was actually my follow-up question as well, because I understand that the mayor is actually trying to train more people on those kind of green jobs, etc. So how is that reflected on our side? Do we actually have a shortage of qualified people to actually undertake those jobs, or are we actually finding the people to do it?
It's a challenge, and we're talking to our suppliers, and they are struggling to get the skilled workforce. So, and that's kind of a national, well, international issue, because there's been a big surge in kind of installing heat pumps and kind of all the retrofitting measures and stuff. So there is a skill shortage there. In Lancaster West, we do have a green skills academy, so we have been training up local people in kind of green skills, retrofitting and stuff like that as well. So we're doing small measures there. Some of the big contracts around the retrofitting in schools, we've got apprenticeships linked into that as well, or providing jobs to local people as well. But overall, it's a national issue. I would say that there's going to be a massive shortage of what they're calling green skills. So there does need to be a considered look at that, definitely.
We've attracted funding to the Future Neighbourhood Programme through the Mayor of London, who actually deliver green skills, as Terry says. So we are delivering as we speak, and we're looking at the different construction and actually what are the jobs on demand that will require, you know, for example, installation of heat pumps or EV charging points, and the jobs that are the most relevant, and upskilling of basically local residents. And as Terry said, one of the key focuses on major contracts is to look at how we work with contractors to offer those possibilities as well, through apprenticeships or local employment as well. And we've embedded that in some of the contracts through social value and environmental clauses.
Yeah, but the thrust of the question is kind of basically right. There isn't a kind of readily available big enough workforce to undertake the kinds of works that we would need to do to hit net zero quickly. And it's true that it's a regional and national, probably a global problem. But we're not insulated from that, despite the fact that we're doing lots of things to improve the position. And I guess the other thing is that when we talk about some of the inflation around costs in construction, it is more acute than before. That essentially, and it's right that they are, these are works that we are undertaking for the public good. There isn't really an ROI, a kind of, and the council shouldn't be we're not a property developer or a property company. We do things for the public good, but it is worth making that point, because when you budget to do works, you look at, okay, what's the payback period? And in lots of cases, that will dramatically increase as a result of the inflation we've seen in the past 2 or 3 years. I mean, there are some relatively small areas where the payback period is still, I think, pretty reasonable in terms of business case. So, for example, streetlights. But in lots of other areas, essentially, we're doing things because we think they are the right thing to do. We should be more confident as a council in saying that, because it is a commitment we're making effectively.
And final question, because you mentioned inflation, what are your projections for the next few years on that front? I mean, is that foreseen to have like as big an impact on the budget as it has in the last few years, or will that ease and make things slightly easier? Or
I wish I knew. No, I think it will be slightly easier. I think it was exceptional the last few years. I think extremely high, and inflation is coming down.
Yeah, I mean, in our draft budget, which we're consulting on at the moment, we do make a number of assumptions about inflation. And I suppose baked into that is what we anticipate in terms of capital projects, which, as I say, essentially net zero works are. is probably true based on our forecasting that outside inflation is now or rather has come on a downward trajectory from its peak.
Yeah.
But it's nevertheless higher than when we undertook some of these commitments. And therefore, the pace at which the cost of these works is increasing is faster than we would have budgeted for, or if we hadn't budgeted, certainly kind of forecast when we made our net zero commitments. So I think the challenge is becoming harder, but it's probably becoming harder a little bit less quickly than 12 or 18 months ago, if you see what I mean.
So a story next. Thanks. I've got several questions. One or two are sort of more strategic and some are rather nitty gritty. But I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in this report, I have to say. It's very encouraging. So I just want to ask about the overall thing being touched on. The question is 100 million spend on is mentioned. But what's it going on? Appreciate most of it's going to probably go on housing, but improving the housing. But do you have a percentage of the biggest items of the 100 million where it's going? So in other words, how much is spent on what? Not every item, but the big ones. And what are the returns expected in savings? I mean, you could say, well, lower fuel costs in the housing sector, for example. But do we have any? So that'd be the question. So do we have any estimates? I wouldn't expect exact numbers that'd be possible.
Should we just frame it by saying that 100 million was a high level estimate that was made probably the best part of 5 years ago. So you're right to use it because it is the figure that we have. So you're correct to use it. But by way of context, I guess I would say the things that we've been talking about have probably changed that number quite dramatically. So although I think 100 million was the estimates at one time, it's probably quite a bit more than that now. You may have detailing coming on, but essentially you're right, housing will be the lion's share of the works. And possibly one of the challenges will be that there are several areas in which there may be a saving, though I flag that the kind of ROI in business case terms isn't hugely strong in some places. But those savings won't always be realised by the council. So again, there's a challenge for us. Now, again, we do a lot of things for the public good, and that's right. But we take it a step back. If we're retrofitting a bunch of schools, the schools get lower energy bills. Council doesn't, and that's still a great thing because we want to ensure that our schools are fit for the future and that their bills are low and that they can manage themselves properly. But it's just worth bearing that in mind again by way of context in terms of the trade-offs that we're making. And I suppose the same would be true in your example around energy bills in homes. I suppose the council does offer some discretionary support through the Tenancy Support Fund, for example, but at a macro level, energy bills are borne by the tenants.
And I think it's also worth noting as well that 100 million, it was part of the carbon neutrality roadmap, and that figure most probably has gone up quite a lot in terms of what it would take us to deliver net zero. That includes quite a lot of kind of what we would call cyclical work as well. So some of this work would have had to be done anyway. So it's replacing heating, it's replacing windows, it's replacing it with a kind of a higher spec or kind of something that contributes to kind of energy savings rather than just replacing it like for like. So yeah, so I think it seems a very big figure, but quite a big percentage of that would be work that you had to do anyway in terms of maintenance for those properties. So it's just worth noting that because otherwise it gets labelled as just net zero work, and it's not. This is maintenance and net zero.
And to put things into context, we mentioned the retrofit accelerator program for schools. We have six schools in phase one, and 4 of them had no boilers, functional boilers, when we were thinking how to replace it. One of them, Avondale, which is in the heart of Nottingham, and a lot of the children that were affected by the Grenfell tragedy was affected by flooding in 2021, and the boiler room was completely flooded. So they were operating on a temporary boiler that was very very costly for them. Also very noisy. So we looked at, as Terry was saying, more energy efficient options that are longer, and there will be benefits to the schools. Other schools like Colville or Babington, they had problems with corrosions of the pipe, and again, boilers were not working. So again, these types of work would have happened anyway, and rather than replace like for like, a gas boiler with another gas boiler, but looking at energy efficient. And the good thing about this in a way is that the governmental funding that is available is in a way allowing us to tap into this type of, energy efficiency improvements because it's targeting for this type of installation.
Could I rephrase the question a little bit and say, how many millions of pounds will be spent on housing, let's say, whatever we call it, in that period of 100 million or 150 million, whatever it is now, but in that period, how much would be invested in the housing, in our housing stock? Much of which would be presumably improving the energy efficiency of houses. Can you
It's the vast percentage of it, so I'd say that's 70-80%. Right, that is on housing. We can send you the housing.
That's helpful to know. That doesn't surprise me. I also find it encouraging actually, because what question? What actually does net zero mean? Are we just displacing it? Like, there's this business of hubs. So it goes electric, so it goes to the power station, which may not be in Kensington or London, but it's still there.
So if we say
what does that actually mean?
So a net zero council will mean the amount of emissions we produce, we will try and reduce that as much as possible. But if we can't get that to zero, which I don't think we necessarily will be, then we will have to look at offsetting it somehow. So we can.
Because the net implies something offsetting. Offsetting is you pay for something in Latin America.
And we haven't got enough offsetting.
Yeah, we have. The world is one of the big problems is not British emissions, which are tiny. Comparatively, but it's the destruction of the Amazon forest.
Yeah, but one of the things we say clearly in the climate emergency action plan is that offsetting is the last resort. We're not looking at that, and if we are looking at offsetting, it will be a local thing. So definitely, that's one of the problems that they have been cutting the Amazonian forest twice, and then just cutting the.
But we will have to be pragmatic. I mean, it's worth saying because if we look in the last 4 or 5 years, we've invested a huge amount, and that's been the right thing to do. But emissions have come down 11%. And we're 5 or 6 years away from 2030. So,
no, I'm glad to see the facing of reality. It's very encouraging.
And a lot of councils have declared climate emergency, and there is a recognition now that a lot of those declarations and the ambition is right. Actually delivering that is going to be really, really challenging just because the financial implications of it. So I think over the next few years, there will be kind of a realization that a lot of councils will maybe tweak some of their ambitions or look at kind of climate adaptation, where how climate change impacts local residents, and saying rather than just net zero, we want to try and make our council more climate resilient. So our residents aren't impacted by climate.
Quite a good segue into Toby.
Would you mind if I ask a couple of details questions?
Go on then. Have a couple of them asked at the same time.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I wanted to ask, what is a low? Because mentioned on page 40, for example, in the kind of a low carbon heating system. What is a low carbon heating system?
It's heat pumps mainly. Whether we have been installing heat pumps in schools.
Okay. Air source.
Air source.
It takes 1 unit of energy and kind of transforms it into 3 or 4 more units of energy.
Right. So I'm looking at the heat pump tab.
And your second question, Dawn?
The second question is the meaning of emissions and for example, on page 45, in the graph, the bar chart, there are 4 categories there, and it says it's about emissions. And what exactly did it mean by the 2 of them? The electricity emissions. What exactly does that mean? Page 45.
So on 2.26, the graph.
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So this. So this is reflecting the council housing stock. The total emissions of the council housing stock, and that's 73% of the overall.
But it's electricity. I don't understand. Electricity is not emitting anything except heat. What does that mean? Because it says total emissions. So what is that measuring? Emissions from electricity.
So electricity, when you use electricity, there's the carbon emissions used to create that electricity. So
they're not in the borough.
I know, but there's you still use a ratio to say like 1 unit of electricity equals 0.2 grams of carbon. there's an agreed amount that you apply to.
Maybe have a glossary and explanation.
Yeah, we
And,
can.
Every
So-
report you do, you can attach it, and then we know.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point. We say at some, we say at some point that we're using carbon conversion factors that are used nationally, but yeah, we will explain
There's a
that.
bunch of
It's for
terms in
both
here,
gas and
which I won't ask right
electricity.
now, but great.
We'll have a,
Yeah.
I think then for next year's paper, if we could have a glossary, please, I think that might help
Yeah.
Dory and everybody else understand.
Absolutely.
We can send it even offline as
I'm going to
a,
move on the question to Toby now, please. Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, really generally about North Kensington community energy. And also a little bit, like a lot of reflections on time to what we've been lost with a data strategy moving forward. I suppose the major question is just is sort of what are the big numbers we're looking at, sort of medium that we imagine that's going to be saving over the next whatever it is, 5 to 10 years. How likely that is. Generally about the sort of our relationship, how directly we're sort of relating, things like that, things like practically how is the community, which again is a word which is a bit really, I know there are meetings under the Westway every now and again. If you could just sort of paint the picture around those questions, that would be helpful.
So the amount of carbon emission savings is around just under 40 tonnes per annum, but it's an actual award-winning model that was set up. So the way that it operates is that it's local residents. There's a company that's been set up. They have a community share offer, so residents can buy into the solar panels, and then they get small investment or small return on their investment. But then the school or the community building get reduced energy.
I'm sorry, it's going to cut off, so I don't end up adding to the question at the end. I'm also just on. So I've got 144 individuals invested £83,000. So that's what I don't trust my mental arithmetic, to be honest. But that's an average of £576 per individual. Who the individuals paying that amount of money into?
Very good question. So the investors come from the local area or from London or the UK. Maybe
it can be anyone.
Yeah, it can be anyone.
I mean, you give a pretty short answer. Anybody can invest in North Kent Community Energy, and I think even some councillors have.
Yeah, as well. So
Yeah.
it's £100, I think. But most people also just put in. You can tick a box, and rather than you get I think it's a 5% return. It goes back into the project.
I suppose in my brain, I'm thinking because it's on the Silchester estate, right? Because I live very near it, and sort of go
It
up.
hasn't been yet installed, but
No.
the plan is to have one. Yeah, as a pilot. Yeah.
Okay, great. And just the rest of the answers. So I'm sorry, I'm just throwing quite a general, quite a broad question, but how do, because I like to follow, what's going on, what's coming up, what's actually, I mean, we use that word offset, but actually what the actual cost of the project itself, emissions wise, all of that kind of stuff. Because I'd quite like a big picture over the next sort of 5-10 years about what that's going to look like and how much of a direct sort of say the council has in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So at the moment, through community energy, there were several sites. So we've installed solar panels. Well, the Energy Co-op installed solar panels on 2 council-owned schools, Thomas Jones and Avondale, and 1 council community centre, Dalgano, and also on Westway Leisure Centre, which is not owned by the council, it's owned by Westway Trust. As we speak, we have a list of buildings that again, Repowering, the partner delivering this, and the Energy Co-op and KC have secured governmental funding to assess a number of buildings. And the aim is, as you rightly said, is to look and continue to develop the community energy project. So one of the buildings that have been identified are schools, potential other public buildings, Silchester as a social housing estate. So the aim is to actually extend the set of projects. And one good thing about community energy is that the funding, the council has not spent any funding on actually structural surveys because it has always been secured through Mayor of London funding, which is specifically for this, or governmental funding. The installation comes from community share offer, and as Terry said, the benefit or the core benefit of this project is that it creates community fund, so the community can actually benefit from it. At the moment, they have been giving micro grants to more than 10 local organizations, and there is 70K that has been created, and ongoing it will be created. And then on top of that, there has been 2 rounds of youth trainings, paid certified training for the young people through this project. And then also other type of activities like solar panel making workshops. So the idea is not only just to install solar panels, it's to bring community benefits and to train young people.
Yeah, I'd love to just ongoing. I'll keep an eye.
Yeah, and we can put you in touch with the group because they have regular meetings.
And much to my shame, I've actually spoken to them several times.
Oh, okay.
It's just one of those ones that I keep saying I'm going to turn up.
It's an amazing project, really. It's fantastic.
And it's a proactive group. They meet every 2 weeks, and they are really.
I know. I'm embarrassed now. I'm remembering how many times I failed to meet them. But yeah, that is a thing.
Before I come to Irene, before we leave North Kent Community Energy, I mean, clearly it's a great project, but the metrics are a bit thin in the paper in terms of how much it's generating, how much energy is it generating, because obviously it's clean energy it's generating, that's offsetting the emissions. But then is the embedded carbon in the equipment accounted for within the because it should be, because that's part of the accountant's emissions. And as it's good work, what's been done to encourage it to spread beyond pockets in North Kensington, because there's a whole borough out there.
Yeah, no, so actually I should have mentioned at the moment we have a pipeline of more than 10 buildings that we're investigating, and it's not the North Kent, it's actually across the borough. And it's we have London community energy maps that are looking at each individual borough, and we're not just focusing on North Kensington. It was set up in North Kensington, and the group is actually debating if it should remain the name because they have been operating mainly. But at the moment, it's focused borough-wide, so it's not just North Kensington. And we're looking at buildings in the south as well.
It has to be community buildings. We can't do individual houses. It's got to be a community building. It's got to go into. That's the way the business model operates. But yeah, if you know of a building that you think is suitable, then do let us know.
Yeah, I could probably do. Arian, let me go to you.
Thanks. I'm on the point here when you raised a point about councils being receding to other net zero. I mean, there could be situations whether it's financial pressures, change in the world environment, or another corona, or, as I said in my last question, alien immigration, for example. Sarcastic, but
jump back to that.
Yeah. I'm not saying a plan B, but I think we should, although it's quite realistic, I believe we can hit the target by 2030 net zero. But there should be a simple document that says, in the event of, for whatever reason, we couldn't manage to achieve the target, I think there should be an alternate decision. Simply just extend for 3 more years. I mean, it's not that the council didn't manage to do it, but because of the external pressures or something. Yeah. So that's my first question. Maybe an answer. And I know, Johnny, you were not the lead member at that time. I think it was Jem.
Yeah, that's right. I wasn't the lead member when we made this commitment, but I'm happy to make as much progress as we can towards it. I mean, I suppose we have one of the relatively small number of options. In the event that we aren't able to hit net zero, we could extend the timeline that we want to meet it within. We could offset, or we could, I suppose, this isn't a promotion of the phrase, but one could abandon the commitment and say that this just isn't something we can practically hit in the medium term. So I suppose it would be effectively that is the sweet things that one can do if you don't hit the targets. So I suppose our first thing would be to look at whether the pragmatic approach is to extend the target or to offset. Because I think we do want to become a greener borough. That is the first thing in our council plan. It was the first thing in the manifesto that we were elected on. So it is important that we try and make good on those commitments because people have put their faith in us to do that.
I agree as well, and there's some good work that we're doing, but also the grid as well as being decarbonised quite quickly as well. So potentially by 2030 and beyond, a lot of the electricity that we use will be kind of all renewable. So our emissions will come down that way as well. But I think the main aim at the moment should be looking at reducing our emissions, and then over the next few years, I think we've got to review it every year to see that journey. If we do need to start thinking around offsetting, then it is thinking of something that is suitable for that and kind of something local that we can kind of monitor.
I agree with what Terry said. I think I would just add as well that the net zero commitment, though it is extremely challenging to hit with the timelines that have been set, and that would be true for every borough, has nevertheless been a really useful spur for councils. I think it's certainly true that we are doing a lot more work to bring down emissions than we otherwise would have in the kind of counterfactual we haven't made a net zero commitment. So if you start from the premise that it is a good thing to bring down emissions and make the borough greener, then saying that we want to hit net zero has undoubtedly accelerated progress against that.
One more question, Chairman. Coming on to the point you just made, Terry, the future energies, renewables, that's predominantly electricity rather than gas. I know we've done fantastic work on replacing 543 old gas boilers. I understand this short-term coming in because you can't just replace a big infrastructure within days or a few since it takes generations. Focus on getting more electricity rather than gas, because you can look at the emissions that predominantly are housing stock. Gas emissions are more in terms of emissions. So is there a short-term and a long-term strategy to replace that sort of the channel where you produce electricity is more renewable? I mean, it's not gas, but
So the journey we're on is to get off fossil fuels. So gas is used a lot for heating, and we do have to try and move away from that. And it's easier in some areas than others. So like Nottingdale Heat Network, that is going to be electricity, but that's replacing some gas boilers with electricity. It does mean changing of infrastructure and stuff as well. So gas at the moment is very cheap. Electricity isn't so cheap. So we've got to look at the costs around that as well. It's not just the cost of implementing it; it's the ongoing costs as well. So it is really, really tricky to do. But the grid going kind of decarbonising the grid by 2030 around that time is a positive thing. So moving towards electricity is the right thing to do. The other thing we've got an issue of in kind of this area in West London is the electricity capacity. The infrastructure, like UK Power Networks, is really quite old and has some serious issues around capacity. So we have to work within those constraints as well. So the housing is the big challenge, but there is that transition to what we're calling low carbon heating, which is moving to electricity.
Would we benefit from the renewable power that we're buying from EDF? Would that slightly reduce our cost, or is it just because of the commitment that we have?
That's the plan, I think, is that if we rely on renewables, then it will bring the unit cost of electricity down.
So that will benefit directly.
That's what that's predicting, yeah.
Thank you.
The lack of capacity in the local area is well known as well. So it's worth noting that there is a medium and long-term strategic piece of work going on regionally and sub-regionally to make sure we're increasing the amount of infrastructure in the ground, because everyone's going off gas at the moment and there's not enough electricity in the ground. But that is being dealt with by EDF and all the London councils. So there's a very strategic piece there to make sure we've got infrastructure in place in the future that will actually meet the needs.
I had a long list of questions, but the committee colleagues have covered many of them. And but one that didn't come up so far was the New Homes Programme. Of course, building new social housing adds to the total of carbon and housing. Obviously, the new homes should be more efficient than the old ones. But how are they accounted for in the figures so far? We've got this programme going on.
Yeah, no, very good question. So every year we rely on data that we receive based on electricity and gas data. So once the new homes program are being built and functioning, and they will be included as part of this. On
some of them are occupied, of course.
Yeah, so they are already included and will be, yes. The element on they should be more energy efficient through the London plan and the council local plan. For any major development, regardless if it's domestic or commercial, there are some strict regulation in terms of energy efficiency they have to meet when building them on site, and this applies to New Homes Programme. We have been liaising with colleagues in the New Homes program as part of their planning applications at the early stages to make sure that they try to achieve as much as possible on site. But to make them the homes and to build them to the most energy efficient standard as possible.
Okay, thank you.
And that's being regulated, as I said, to the council plan, and anyone has to for any major development.
Thank you very much. My second question was the big one that Johnny and Arian have just been discussing, and it's are we going to meet the target? Now, Arian says we are, and Johnny, you say it's very challenging and it's still a useful target. But I couldn't really glean from the paper, except by reading between the lines, what the answer to that question was. When one has a target, I would have thought the project management skills would suggest that you've got some metrics which show you time, cost, and the operational details and the outcome. And there are some things in this paper which cover all of those things, but never in one place. Again, paragraph 3.1 is an attempt to put some of those together, but there's no kind of graph on it. So I can't tell from this paper how far away we are, how much extra we have to spend by 2030 to reach the target.
It's a really good question. So, and there's so many moving parts to that. So the roadmap that was produced back in 2019, it does show that trajectory of what's needed. There is kind of a residual amount of emissions that are going to be really tricky to get rid of. So that's potentially where we have to offset. But that trajectory needed. It did outline the kind of the investment needed in there, and prices and stuff gone up significantly. So we're behind what was projected. So I'm being honest, I think we are not delivering as quick as we should have in order to achieve the 2030 target.
But presumably though, if
we can reframe that, can't we? I mean, there's a difference between going carbon zero and going net zero.
Yeah. Well, it's about net zero, isn't it?
No, I know, and to elucidate that, to go carbon zero would be to eliminate all emissions, and to go net zero would be to have net, as a net figure. And so it may be that our entire estate, or all of our assets, are not carbon zero by 2030. But if we make a choice to offset, or we are able to leverage, an extremely high figure in terms of costs at a significant pace, then those are two routes by which we can still hit net zero. So
generating our own energy from North Kensington Community Energy, if it was expanded significantly, generating clean energy, that would be another way.
It would be another way. There are multiple routes that can get us closer to the target, and there is a combination of those that can still get us to net zero. How we get there, I think it's fair to say we don't have crystal balls, and there are concrete actions that will get us closer, but which actions we take beyond the current capital program and pipeline, we can't say with certainty yet, because we would have to go through the kind of governance processes and the political processes by which we establish and then make good on commitments. So I think the answer is it's still in the council's gift to achieve net zero emissions through one of a number of routes. using a variety of kind of mechanisms, but a simple kind of carbon zero approach is extremely challenging.
But there are a lot of national, and policy changes that will happen in the next years because it's not just the council in this board. So we will be relying on massive governmental funding to be deployed or changes in the grid, as Terry said. So it's not just locally, it will be impacting, we will be impacted by other changes in the.
Just to give you some reassurance, so if we put housing aside, there's some really good work going on. So most of our schools now have got a retrofit program. So all the schools, council-owned schools, we've got a program to either install heat pumps or retrofit. So targeting those. The leisure centres are going over to low carbon heating, both at Chelsea and at Kensington Leisure Centre. All the fleet, apart from our waste vehicles, because of the depot issue, are transitioning over to electric as soon as possible. And we are looking at what's called a HVO. So it's using kind of biofuels in our waste vehicles, which reduces carbon emissions by 90%. So, and it doesn't need any kind of alteration to the vehicles. So we're piloting that this year. So the street lighting as well, it's all going over to LED. So housing is really complex because you're dealing with people's homes and it's very expensive. But the things we've got direct control on, we are really delivering a lot and we're reducing those emissions. It's just that council housing is one of the biggest areas of emissions.
Well, I think there's some magnificent work going on, but as committee members have alluded to, and you said yourselves, paragraph page 43, paragraph 2.2.4, the council housing is such a big portion of the problem.
Yeah.
And I think this was the thrust of questions from Tim and Waller and others that if you're going to address that aspect of the problem, really you do need to looking at the housing, and then and of course if you then go on to, I think it's at 2.3.13, housing has actually gone in the wrong direction. Yes, it has gone in the wrong direction because the figures have gone up at the stages. So that's a big challenge. And I think in terms of next year's papers, of course, this is something that I think. And I'm sure the committee will be with me on this. We want to see this again this time next year to see where you've got to. So I think we need to see more metrics next year and probably more of the graph, more of that what you were describing, Terry, what's the pathway and where are the options, how do we reduce carbon further, or how do we generate more electricity, clean electricity, clean energy, to get to that point of net zero position. How much does it all cost and how much money have you got available, and should it be the case, what's the gap between the money, the cost and what we've got available, because I guess what we really need to understand. And then from that, choices could be made about, as John was suggesting, to the extent the target, recognising that it's done good having a target, or is it actually one small push, last push, and we actually meet the target? And of course, we don't know the answer to that. So perhaps we can review that as the task for next year. So that's on with them. And obviously, there's some great work going on in the lines that you briefed. And thank you very much for the paper. And hopefully, somebody's captured the recommendation there. But I will ask some councillors from outside the committee before I let you go.
Well, you'll be relieved to hear. Nothing to ask.
But
I
have
a very quick question. Just talking of costing and achieving it. Would you ever consider selling, if you were to have enough power, to selling it back to the grid?
Yeah, if we were fortunate enough to
produce
enough. So North Kensington Energy project does sell back to the grid, and that's how it kind of returns the shareholders' investment. And yeah, we can definitely look at rolling that project. It's just finding the space, I think, as well. And the buyback tariffs have significantly reduced as well. So when we first set up some of these schemes, it was actually we were getting quite a lot for the electricity. Now that has been reduced quite significantly as well. So we've just got to look at the pros and cons of that. But if we can produce electricity and sell it back to the grid, then that'd be fantastic. Or you can just use it ourselves, so we don't have to buy from the grid. Yeah.
As Terry said, the NKC projects where we've installed already solar panels, they managed to lock the feed-in tariff that now has been reduced or completely removed for 20 years. So they actually still benefit from that. And as Terry said, some of the electricity is being sold back to the grid, or they get funding or money through the feed-in tariff. And that's being put back into the community through a community fund, or giving back to the investors as a return on their investment. And for example, we even have solar panels on this building, and again, that's benefiting from the feed-in tariff because that was locked, a few years ago. So normally for solar panels where projects are installed and that they usage is not used the most on site, is sold back to the grid. But the best is in general for project is to use as much as possible on site, because you're reducing the electricity consumption basically, rather than selling it back because of these small tariffs now, basically.
Right. We just need some more sunshine. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. Well,
I've wanted a couple, 2 or 3 detailed questions.
Shouldn't take very long. I think we're out of time now because it's 25 past 8. So I think we will. You can ask them in writing. I mean, if there's factual questions, just ask them in writing, and we can all see them. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Item 6, just very briefly, the community work programme. We've got planning, short-term holiday letting, and the results of the invite conference. Thank you very much to James for sending down the basic reports. But we will think about recommendations in January for leadership. I noticed that the lead member has already written to the minister and have replied. Yes, because I didn't say very much, but we think that's we will just, so as I was saying, we had a reply from the minister. We didn't say a lot, but we might have some more recommendations in along that, things that we might want to ask for from that. Also, each committee is being asked to look at KPIs for its departments, key performance indicators. There is already a set for the environment department, but there isn't any space in our committee diary to put another serial in January. But what we'll do, we'll circulate them in January so you can have a look at the KPIs that already exist. There will possibly be, or some of them might be incorporated in later committee papers this year. Next year, we'll have a full serial in January, the January meeting, which will be devoted to looking at and scrutinising the KPIs that Bo and his team look at every quarter, I think. And we'll do them once in the year, and we'll put that into the programme when we can plan it far enough in advance so that we don't end up planning at 9 p.m. finish. 9 p.m. finish is bad, but we've managed 25 past 8, and that is the agenda. So thank you all very much indeed for attending. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.